So the last factors that were discussed in the consideration of negative transfer of training by a panel of experts was work environment and task characteristics. So here they just broke it down into a couple of sub-factors. So they looked at the surface similarity and dissimilarity and structure similarity and dissimilarity. So this is where you may have a training situation or a simulation or virtual environment that is similar but is also dissimilar in some of its sort of surface characteristics and the structure of it. So this looks at training environments where there may be information or actions that are very similar to what they're going to perform in an operational environment. However, there's some slight nuances in there that are going to impact the negative transfer, because essentially what goes on within a training environment is that experience is representative of the training environment, and people learn to behave within the training environment. So they essentially game the environment that they're in. So whatever the information within that simulation or virtual environment is that informs perceptual understanding and that response or actions that they can take and how that outcome is actually achieved is how they learn to perform in that environment. So if it's similar but different, that information that they're using, those actions that they're taking may not necessarily transfer to effective operational performance. So this requires a deeper understanding of both operations and training and essentially human learning to try and reduce the risk of negative transfer of training through well-intended poor training design. So this kind of looked at the behaviours learned in the learning context may be wrongfully reapplied in the transfer context. So even though it works in training, that action may not actually work in a real life environment. And an example of this could be speed of training. So within a training environment, we may reduce the speed of how we go about that action so that they can learn it, they can perform it, and they can get a good outcome. Where in an operational environment, it's happening so much faster that that action is actually going to lead to failure or a negative consequence. So one of the examples that they use from aviation is that procedures can be largely similar between different aircraft types. However, there's different details between each aircraft. So each procedure doesn't necessarily transfer between aircraft types. And this can be similar with equipment within a lot of these domains. So this is where you have to make sure that the trainees understand that when changing to different aircraft types, the differences in emergency procedures and solving these critical issues should be trained thoroughly. So we may need to make sure that we're training on all the specifics or equipment that they're going to be using, okay? And this comes down again to a sort of time constraints. So we need to make sure that we're maximising the transfer of training, or people have the time to train appropriately or prepare appropriately when they're changing between different situations and equipment. So the last one I spoke about was the insufficient backup in the workplace. And the examples they used here were where learned skills were not being transferred to the work environment because it just wasn't supported by supervisors or senior colleagues, okay? So they may have a different way of doing things. They may have been brought up under a different training methodology. And this may be particularly relevant when you're evolving training, is that there may be members of the organisation that have just never trained that way. They don't understand the new training and they just don't support it. So people are less likely to do it within their presence, because one of the things that we need to consider when we go out into our sort of performance operational environment is that people will adapt to the culture that they go into. Okay, they take on cultural norms, they take on behaviours, the way things are done. So if it's only previously taught skills that are being conducted, then they're most likely to revert to those skills. Okay, and then the next one they looked at was that things like time constraints and hierarchical nature of the job may prevent the transfer of skills to practice, as senior employers have not received the training and do not see it necessary. So again, this is something where, as an example, you may have updated some of your skills or procedures, but you just haven't had time to go around and make sure that it's implemented throughout the whole organisation. So there's people there that don't understand it, have never done it, and don't see it being a necessary skill. So it's going to decrease the level of transfer to the operational environment. So that's the last of the factors that they spoke about within this research article. Okay, there's a link available, and I'd certainly encourage people to go away and read the research article so that you can look at it, understand how it applies to the performance environment that you're in, okay, how you're going to change, or whether it's useful for your training environment, okay, rather than just taking my word for it. Because there's always room for improvement to make sure that we're giving our learners or our trainees the best chances of performing in an operational environment, particularly when they're in these critical situations or where they're going through emergency procedures. So I hope there was a few good takeaways within that research summary. So I appreciate your time, and I look forward to bringing you the next one.